You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast featuring some of Indiana's most fascinating men and women whose impact has shaped our state, our communities, and us. Join us as we discuss their imprint on our history. Leaders and Legends is brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated, your local veteran business enterprise specializing in public relations, media relations, public outreach, crisis communications, and digital photography. My name is Robert Bain, Principal of Veteran Strategies, former Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Greg Ballard, and Communications Director for the Indiana Republican Party. I'm honored to be your host for our discussion. Today we are here with longtime Indianapolis legend Jim Shella. He has been forced me to be on the other side of the microphone many times, and so now this is my chance for revenge. All those off-the-record conversations, Jim, they're all good to go now.
This is on the record, is it?
Oh, kind of. Depends on if anyone's listening.
Okay.
Jim has been a longtime friend. I've been interviewed by him many times, and I think if you talk to a lot of the people who do public relations, especially in the political realm and government, no one gives up an opportunity to have a conversation with Jim, on or off the record, and we're very delighted to have you today. Thank you, sir.
It's great to be here.
Jim is not from here originally. He's from Minnesota. How did you matriculate over here to Channel 8 for the last 34 years? Jim retired a couple years ago, but spent all of his career in Indianapolis. Is that correct?
No.
At Channel 8?
Well, since you asked how I got here, I'll take you from the beginning. I went to St. Cloud State University in Minnesota. We are currently the number one ranked hockey team in the country. And I'm happy to tell you that my first broadcasting experience was doing the hockey games on the college radio station.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me stop you right there real quick. What were you doing on February 22nd, Washington's birthday, 1980? Still in college?
No. I was at my second job in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
That was the night that the U.S. beat the Soviets 4-3. Lake Placid.
You know what? I hadn't. Thank you for.
And I know you're a hockey nut. That's why I asked.
Yeah, I can tell you. I hadn't. I moved to Grand Rapids later that year. You've helped my memory here. I was sitting in a car in the parking lot of a TV station in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where I lived, and listening to the game on the radio.
Couldn't believe. I mean, we were hockey fans. I was actually at the Ellenberger
because, as
Ice
I recall,
rink.
I got a pretty good memory. I think that the broadcast was delayed, and I was listening to it live on a radio station out of the Twin Cities.
The TV broadcast on ABC was delayed, and I was at the Ellenberger Ice rink. It's a Friday night. And we skated, and then, they had a little black and white TV, about the size of a toaster back then. And we all sat and watched it. And we were hockey fans. The Racers had come and were relatively popular. And because we were ice skating, we were all, but I wasn't necessarily a huge hockey fan. But you, as a huge hockey fan, what did you think?
Well, it was tremendous. Now, and the coach of that team was Herb Brooks, as everybody knows. Well, what you may not know is that Herb Brooks, after that point, coached in the NHL and then became the coach at St. Cloud State University.
I didn't know that. Because he didn't do all that well in the NHL, as I recall.
Right, but he decided that he wanted to be a hockey evangelist of sorts. And St. Cloud State was a Division III program. He went there and made it a Division I program. And the home ice arena in St. Cloud is now named the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center.
Did he coach Minnesota before? Was he the University of Minnesota coach,
yes.
Not the North Stars,
yes.
but the University of Minnesota coach when he became Olympic coach? Is that right?
I believe that's right.
So go back to how you came to it. I couldn't resist.
No, that's fine. So I graduated from St. Cloud State University. While I was there, I took an internship at a TV station in Rochester, Minnesota.
Nice weather.
Rochester's a lovely town. They get winter, but it's the skyways that are now familiar in downtown Indianapolis. They've existed in Rochester for a long time, and they also have subways. They have that you can walking tunnels through downtown
because it's that
rough. Well, yeah, and they've got the Mayo Clinic there, and so they've got a lot of folks who are trying to get around downtown who may not be from there. So anyway, I during my internship in Rochester, I made some contacts that helped me get a job in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, at what was then WMT, the CBS affiliate. My internship ended on a Friday, and my started my first job the next Monday, and made a deal so I could get off to go back to graduation.
What year would this be?
That would have been 1976.
So you were working in Iowa in 76.
Yes.
Because the Iowa caucuses were big that year. Were you there that early? The presidential caucuses.
My first day on the job in Cedar Rapids, Iowa was the day before Election Day in 1976. And the next day, on Election Day, I took part in interviews with both of Iowa's U.S. senators.
Really?
Yeah, Dick Clark and John Culver. And so that was my first taste of covering politics. And
was that something, I mean, Jim covered politics in Indiana for 30 plus years. Was that something, did that give you the taste, or did you already have that?
I already had it. I went to Boise State when I was in high school. I studied, I took three political science courses in college. I was interested, but had no idea how fortunate a move it was to go to Iowa, because I was in Iowa for the 80 caucuses.
Where Bush upset Reagan and turned that race, flipped it around a little bit till Reagan won in New Hampshire a few weeks later.
And on the other side, Jimmy Carter was running for re-election, but Ted Kennedy was out there campaigning. I used to, on my days off, I would freelance for CBS News, and Phil Jones, from Fairmount, Indiana, was following Teddy Kennedy, and I spent a couple of days with him, trailing Teddy Kennedy, because they needed somebody who had a car and could find the airport in case they had to get filmed back to New York.
And so, take us through kind of, and then how do you end up here?
So I spent 4 years in Cedar Rapids, and then got a job in Grand Rapids, Michigan, at what was then WOTV. It's now known as Wood TV, and had been previously. It's the NBC affiliate. I spent 2.5 years there, and then came here in December of 1982.
Was it interesting being in Michigan in the early 80s with everything that was happening with the auto industry and gas prices, and wasn't the Republican National Convention in Detroit in 1980?
It was. I didn't get there. Trying to piece
but
the
that was the
timeline
point
together.
of having it there, was the depression
Yes.
of the auto industry and the economy in general.
Yeah. They had a governor at the time who was in his Republican governor, George Milliken, who was in his fourth term. But I got the opportunity to cover Gerald Ford a little bit. Grand Rapids was his hometown.
Sure, that's right.
Yeah, he cursed at me one night.
Deservedly?
Probably.
You're the most honest person I know in the media, so when I say deservedly, half the time I expect you to go, yeah.
He didn't want to do an interview, and I wasn't taking no for an answer, and so when he finally agreed to do the interview, he had to cuss me out first.
Well, it's worth it then.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. It's given me a great story.
And so Channel 8, you come here.
Yeah.
It's probably at the time the big station, the preeminent station here in Indianapolis, I would say. And a lot of that has to do with Ahern. I'm biased. We only watch Channel 8 because Ahern was Catholic. It's the same thing I said to Barris. My dad says we have to watch this guy. He's Catholic.
Well, actually, Channel 6 was on top when I got to town.
In the
early 80s. And Channel 8, as it turns out, was on the rise. Once you get to the 90s, we were pretty dominant there for a while. But we were a solid number 2 when I got here.
And I guess I am biased because that's what we watched.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was that connection. Indianapolis when you came here as opposed to Indianapolis when you retired. Would you like to chat a bit about the differences?
Oh, yeah. Well, I can tell you, when I came here on my job interview, I took a cab from the airport to the Channel 8 studio, which is at 20th and Meridian, and it must have been on the way back to the airport. We went past the construction site for the Hoosier Dome.
It would have been, yeah.
Yeah. So the convention center was a fraction of its size, and in those days, Saturday night downtown, you could shoot a cannonball down Washington Street and not hit anything. It's a lot different now.
Did you grew up a Vikings fan?
I did grow up a Vikings fan.
And how long did it take you, like my brother Michael, who started rooting for the Vikings in Super Bowl IV when they lost to the Chiefs and hasn't ever recovered? How long did it take you to switch your allegiance?
It took a few years. I can tell you, I'm happy to tell you that I've been a Colts season ticket holder since they came to town. But you might recall that the Colts weren't very good when they first.
We talked about
here.
that with Bill Benner.
Yeah,
really not until they swung that trade for Dickerson. Remember, I was in the Army then. It was like at late '80s. They did this blockbuster trade to bring one of the true stars.
You might appreciate the day that the Colts came to town. Their training facility, their first training facility, was actually a vacant elementary school at the corner of Kessler and Binford. And that day, that was my story. It was where the Colts going to train. And I walked through the building with Frank Cush when he saw it for the first time.
Yeah, because he was the coach.
He was the coach, and he was not happy.
Because I think the part of the deal was that they had to build this complex for them, which is now out by Eagle Creek.
Right, and it hadn't been constructed yet, and literally they took over a vacant elementary school with no football field. It had a big yard in back. I think it's a housing development now.
Did you come here to cover politics?
I came here,
or was it just like this is a bigger city than what I'm in now, so it's a natural progression?
It was a natural progression. I took the job that I accepted was a general assignment reporter and weekend assignment editor. I think, truth be known, that the news director at the time, Lee Giles had it in. I had covered the State House in Michigan, and I think he hired me knowing that his State House reporter was about to leave town. Bob Rossback was the guy's name, and his wife had already taken a job in Detroit, and he was going to follow her shortly. So I was a general assignment reporter for about 3 weeks, and then I became the State House reporter.
Was Jim Hester there when you were there?
Jim Hester was there then.
For those who don't know, Jim Hester is the legendary photographer and partner of Jim Shella in the State House. As big a man as his heart is. He's a terrific, terrific guy.
Well, and a terrific photographer. I like to tell people we'd sit through these 2-hour hearings in the General Assembly, and you can sit through a 2-hour hearing and there'll be one soundbite that really crystallizes everything that happens. And you go back to the station and you look at the tape, and during that one soundbite, Jim would be zooming in. He paid attention. He knew why he was there and what he was doing. And other photographers, you'd look over and they're playing solitaire on their phone.
And just real quickly, and then we'll move on. But Ron, your photographer, is another terrific guy.
Yeah,
who just retired, I believe. Or?
He did. I was. It took. I was at Wish for 3 years before Jim Hester and I teamed up, and then we were together for 23 years until he took a buyout when the recession hit, and then I was teamed up with Ron Nakasone for
good guy
8 years, I believe.
I remember one time I was working at the State Republican Party as comms director, and you and Jim came to interview Murray Clark and I. And you must have been there 40 minutes, and 25 seconds of it was the actual interview because so much else was going on and being discussed and laughed about and that sort of thing. And
well, one of my favorite quotes is from Woody Allen, who once said that 85% of success is just being there. And when I would go to interview folks involved in politics, I was doing a story that day. I wanted their take on the story that day, but I was there mining information as well. I mean, it was about being there.
Well, and that's something I would have to say that candidly is sorely lacking in a lot of media encounters these days. There are a lot of reporters through no fault of their own, either because of corporate culture or inexperience, because there is so much turnover, especially in TV these days. So it's not a slam on them. Who you have to spend a lot of time going like, okay, do you understand what's going on here? Do you understand why this is important? And, being interviewed by you, for example, or like someone like Jack Reinhardt on public safety, where you're just like, all I need to do is give him his quote. All I need to do is answer his questions. I don't need to do anything else. And for a flack, for someone who does PR, that's helpful. That's really helpful. And when you started at the State House after being general assignment, how long did it take you before you feel like, okay, I've got my sea legs? Like, these guys trust me, or A, they're willing to talk to me, that sort of thing. Because Orr would have been governor at the time.
Yeah, Bob Orr was in his first term. So, I started covering the 1983 session of the General Assembly, and Bob Orr ran for re-election in 1984. And I think I didn't really feel like I was involved in things until the 84 election, I don't think. I can tell you that, figuring out the General Assembly the first time around is a difficult chore. Just learning the process, not only the players, and it takes you a couple of years to get up to speed.
You're listening to Leaders and Legends with legendary Channel 8 political reporter Jim Shella. When you start talking to politicians and you start to kind of try to mine them for information and to get them to feel comfortable, how hard is it to say, look, I'm not going to burn you unless you burn yourself. Like, you can talk to me, and if you want to go off the record, that's fine. Is that something that comes naturally to a lot of politicians, or is it something where you're like, okay, this guy's he's always going to have his guard up, and I can never talk to him except with the camera in my hand, or a camera in Jim's hand?
Well, I tell you what, it's all about relationships and building relationships, but not all of my relationships have been good ones. I can tell you that early on in my career, I had a difficult experience with Dan Burton, and that continued for a long, long time.
Dan Burton was a longtime congressman from Indiana. Controversial, I would say. Marched to his own drummer.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think maybe it was 1986. He was running for re-election, and you'll recall there was a Republican by the name of Joe Watkins who was running against Andy Jacobs. Okay. And a lot of Republicans thought Watkins had a chance to knock off Andy Jacobs, but he was short on money, and Burton had a lot of money, and there were Republicans who were saying, well, if only Burton would give some of his money to Watkins, maybe we could win 2 seats. And so I had him on camera, and I was asking him about, why he wouldn't do that. And he kept giving me obtuse answers. And we stopped the interview, and the photographer was still shooting video of the two of us talking when he gave me the real answer. He looked at me and he said, when I get in a fight, I try to beat the hell out of the other guy. And I put that on TV because it wasn't off the record. The camera's rolling. He had a microphone on him. And it was the answer to the question.
And he objected.
He objected. And I'd say we had a bad relationship probably till he left Congress.
Did it ever happen that you had an opportunity to do that same thing to someone else? In other words, they keep talking when they think the interview's over, and you look at what they're saying when you get back to the studio, and you're like, I just can't use that. I want to, but I just can't.
Yeah, as I recall, I actually talked to my bosses about, we had some discussion about whether we should use that or not, and for the reasons I just cited, we decided that it was fair game. it's usually pretty easy to figure out whether something should be used or not.
So the or years become the buy years.
Right.
How much different was it between, I mean, Orr was a World War II, I believe he was a bomber pilot in World War II. I know he served in World War II, went to Yale, and now you have.
Yeah, Josie Orr, his first wife, was a bomber pilot. Seriously, she ferried bombers during the war.
Oh, she did? Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I thought he served in combat in World War II. Did he not?
He
would have been old enough. I mean,
yeah.
So then the buys come in. Completely
Right.
different party, completely different generation. I don't know. Well, you probably would.
He's younger than me. And he was. I will tell you one of the more fun stories that I did. That he was running against John Mutz, who was lieutenant governor and very seasoned and experienced, and the Republicans were trying to make something out of by his lack of experience and his youth. And so one day I did some research, and I found out that there had been two governors younger than him. The Constitution says you need to be 30 years old to serve as governor. Mm-hmm. James Brown Ray and Jonathan Jennings were
the first governor.
The first governor. Jennings was 30, I believe, and I believe James Brown Ray was under 30 and lied about his age.
You trying to get into a bar?
As I'm trying to recall the research, but I did this story, to tell everybody, first of all, how young Bai is, but secondly, how he's not the youngest, and those guys, there's no videotape of them.
Right.
And so I need pictures because I'm doing a TV story, and so one of the things, if you hang out at the State House, is that there's a portrait of every governor that hangs somewhere. And I went and found the portrait directory, and it turns out both of those portraits were hanging in John Mutz's office.
Oh.
And so we went up and asked if we could take a shot of each of them. Just so happened he wasn't there right then, and we went in his office and we're shooting them. And one of the staff members came in and said, "Yeah, those are two of his favorite governors."
How do you? One thing I would say this, and it's a compliment, obviously, and it's almost somewhat old school. You were always a journalist, but I mean, you will say this in a certain way. You allowed yourself to become friends. Like there were certain people you covered who you were friendly with, and there were certain people who do what I do. I mean, you were always terrific to me. We always had tremendous conversations, but whether it's a politician, an elected official, or their staff, how hard is it to walk in? And my only experience with you on this was during RFRA when I was working for Governor Pence, where you had this like pained look on your face that you were getting ready to just roast me on camera. How hard is it to walk in an office and go, "Look, I know we like to laugh and joke, but this is a legit story. I can't walk past it."
Yeah, if I've got a relationship with you or with somebody else, it's my hope that we understand each other, and you know what I'm doing, and I'm not going to take a cheap shot. But I always felt like I could be a little tougher on my friends because they understood.
And I've had situations with reporters in my years doing this where I've looked at them before it's rolling, right? For example, there was one particular one with a TV reporter who's current, so I won't name him, and said, "Okay, are we fighting?" And he looked at me and he goes, "We're fighting." I said, "That's all I want to know."
Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll say like, "Okay, is this a watchdog adversarial story, or is this more just kind of public information? You want to make sure the public will know?" And he'll say, No, we're just doing a quick story, and we're not digging into anything. We just think the public should know. But sometimes I think it's incumbent upon people who do what I do for a living in media relations to look at the reporter. I'm like, okay, now are you going to come after me so that I can respond in kind? Yeah. And most reporters will be like, it's going to be a tougher interview than most. And I'm like, that's all I need to know.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I never tried to surprise anybody. I was just telling somebody the other day about one of my all-time favorite stories was when Steve Goldsmith was running for governor. And talked to him one morning and went back and put the tape in and looked at it, and he had jet black hair with a little gray at the temples. And I needed some archive video for that story. And so I went and found an archive tape, and I put it in. And there he is on the archive tape with salt and pepper gray hair. And it occurred to me, he's dyeing his hair. Now, big deal, right? But it just so happened that the week before, Bob Dole, who was running for president, was interviewed by Ken Bodie on PBS.
This would have been 1996.
Right. And Bodie asked him if he dyed his hair, and Dole admitted to it. So I got an easy TV story. You got the before, the after, the context, but now I need to get a reaction from Goldsmith, and I didn't ambush him. And I called his campaign staff and said, "Here's the story I'm doing. I got to talk to him." And they found an opportunity where I could talk to him away from other people. And I asked the guy if he dyed his hair, and he gave what I thought was an interesting answer. It was something like, it's a matter of personal hygiene, and it's personal. Which I thought, especially when you look at the video evidence, it tells you something about his character.
Of all the elections that you covered, now obviously you'd be like Bill Benner, right? Who has to close his, God love him, yesterday he's closing his eyes, going, okay, let me think. Which outcome of the gubernatorial elections that you covered surprised you the most? I have a guess, but that doesn't mean anything. From 84 till 2016.
Yeah, you're making me go back. Well, that one in 96, it was Steve Goldsmith against Frank O'Bannon.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Oh, well, Goldsmith and the Republicans were very surprised by that outcome. Wish TV had done some polling, and we paid for exit polling that year. It's the only time we ever did, I think. And we got an exit polling report about midday on Election Day. First of all, our final poll showed O'Bannon ahead. And we got this exit polling information, and you lay that over the top of our polling information, and it matched. And so I went on the air after the polls closed at 6 o'clock that night, and I said Frank O'Bannon's going to win. And Steve Goldsmith's campaign staff had their hair on fire. They just couldn't believe that I could be saying something like that.
Did they produce polling that showed something different?
They didn't. They didn't.
That's kind of your answer.
And it turns out I was right. So that was kind of a surprising outcome in the big picture. I was not surprised that night.
2004, Daniels beats Kernan.
Yeah.
And what was a weird year or so of politics. Kernan, who extraordinarily popular war hero. I don't know anyone who says a bad word about Joe Kernan. Nobody. And says he's not going to run for governor. Governor O'Bannon dies. He becomes governor, decides to run. And we were asking Jim Kittle and Ed Tracy when we interviewed them together about that election. Were you surprised that Daniels won, or was it like it's about damn time the Republicans finally capture the state that they own, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, no, I wasn't surprised by that. And I think, in retrospect, the fact that Joe was in and then he was out and then he was back in certainly couldn't have helped him. I have a very clear memory of going to the Wish TV Christmas party one night and getting a tip at some point in the evening that Kernan was getting out of the race. And so I came home late one night and spent probably an hour on the phone trying to track this down, and eventually did. But it was a big surprise when he got out, and then he almost had to get in. And
the pressure on him, from what I understand at the time, was enormous to run for re-election. He had named Kathy Davis the first female lieutenant governor, and he wasn't extraordinarily popular to begin with, and then you have the tragedy of Governor O'Bannon dying.
Yeah,
you covered the race in 2004. Mitch Daniels' campaign, I think, is almost universally lauded as a particularly brilliant
they had a good campaign manager.
Bill Osterley is who they're talking about, and Mitch Daniels.
I think
his
name was Mitch. I think his name was Mitch. Bill Osterley did a nice job as a functionary, I would say.
All I know is he likes to eat the golden ace.
Yeah.
What was it like covering that campaign? And because it got terrific. It got terrific reviews. Daniels' campaign specifically got terrific reviews contemporaneously. People are like, "Wow, he's doing stuff that hasn't been done." It shows how smart he is, and I think he probably worried that he had a particular image, so he ran counter to that image. Did you ever feel like, okay, this isn't the greatest thing ever? I need to try to bring it back to reality.
Well,
or just the race itself, you just said was tense because it was close.
I was a panelist at the last debate between Daniels and Kernan. It took place at IU Southeast down in New Albany. You could cut the tension in there with a knife. It was
because of animosity, or just because the race was so close.
Both.
I mean, it's high stakes for Republicans. I mean, you can't continue to win all these presidential elections and have people scratch and vote for the D.
But it was also a very negative race, and on a personal level, all these the Kernan campaign accusing Daniels basically of on the IPL board forcing people into poverty because of what they did with pension plans and whatnot, and
taking on Eli Lilly, which was unheard of.
Yeah, it was ugly. It was ugly.
Of all the campaigns you covered, which one was like, this dude's going to get killed? There's no chance in hell. Did you ever feel that where one person just simply never had a chance? I have one in my mind as well.
Well, I mean, certainly Jill Long Thompson ran a couple of races where I mean, she was a U.S. Senate candidate in 1986, if you'll recall.
Yeah, against Dan Quayle, and then she ran against Mitch Daniels in 2008.
Yeah,
for governor.
Yeah, and in both of those cases, didn't mount much of a campaign,
but had won other races. Had won
for
congressional
Congress
races. Right?
Yeah, up in Northeast Indiana. That Senate race in =86. You remember Louis Mahern was going to be the Democratic candidate, and Louis had a heart attack and dropped out of the race. And they had three people seeking to become the Democratic nominee at that point, and they made the choice in a Saturday morning meeting, and out came Jill Long Thompson, and she never got on television, as I recall. She raised about $100,000, which is,
and at the time I think it was Dan Quayle was the sitting senator, having beaten Birch Bayh in 1980, but he had the highest percentage of votes in the history of Indiana Senate, and then two years later becomes vice president.
In large part because he became George Bush's running mate, because George Bush was looking for someone who could help him with the gender gap, and they looked at how well Quayle had done against a female opponent to make the argument. Quayle's pollster was also George Bush's pollster.
Is it Teeter?
Yeah,
Bob Teeter
from Detroit, and so his performance against Jill Long Thompson, which I thought, throw that out and start over, but that allowed them to make the argument that made him the running mate, and vice president.
What about Pearson in '92?
Lindley Pearson, that was he was basically a no-show.
Which for a Republican gubernatorial candidate, it's astonishing how 92 went.
I can tell you, I had the strangest meeting with Lindley Pearson, because I was going to say I was kind of rough on him and his campaign, but I think just telling the truth was rough. And he didn't like the way he was getting treated, and so he called me into his office one day. He was the attorney general, and he wanted to have a personal, off-the-record meeting to try to convince me that he deserved better coverage. And what he kept telling me was that he had the plan to beat Evan Bayh. And of course, I'm saying, what's the plan? Well, you'll see. I can't tell you now, but I have the plan.
Let's move forward a little bit to something that most people don't know, and maybe some do. But you had the honor of roasting Donald Trump.
1996 Indianapolis Press Club Gridiron Dinner. Whenever this story comes up, I have to give credit to my wife. The press club, was their major fundraiser, and they had chosen Mike McDaniel, who was then state GOP chairman, and me to be the roast masters. And I came home and was talking to my wife one night, and I said, we need to find somebody to roast who will help us sell tickets. Who do you think we should get? And she said, how about Donald Trump, who was then opening a casino in Gary? And I said, come on. She said, have you tried? So we tried. And he came and brought Marla Maples with him. We had to change the venue. We normally held the event at the Indiana Roof. We had to move it to the convention center. Our normal ticket sales of about 800 went quickly to 1,400.
Well, he was, riding high, I guess that's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Was it surrealistic to see him become president?
Yes. Well, I mean, I don't think I needed that experience for it to be surrealistic.
It's correlation, not causation.
Yeah. And just to finish with the roast story, though, I just, I do want to go make sure everybody knows that I did make fun of his hair, and I called him a dick.
I've seen that video when the wonderful John Ketzenberger revived the Gridiron Dinner on behalf of the Indiana Fiscal Policy Institute 6 years ago.
Sounds right.
7 years ago. I was part of the not platform committee. What the hell would it be called?
Script committee?
Yes, Jim and I were and Jennifer Wagner and some others were, and Lisa Dietrich and John Ketzenberger, of course, and other people. And I would have to say, to be candid, that Jim and I were like little kids sitting next to each other saying, let's say this, let's say this. And the beautiful and wonderful Susan Williams kept saying, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. And Jim and I were like going, but it's a roast. She goes, I don't care. We're not saying that.
Susan, she actually talked me out of a line the night of the show.
Because I think people kind of know what they're getting into, right?
Yeah, but there's still lines. I always thought it was my job as in gridiron planning to establish for everybody where the line was.
No conversation with Jim would be complete, obviously, without talking a little bit about Indiana Week in Review. I was lucky enough to appear on that show. My timing was always terrible. I was never, ever, ever on during a good Republican week. Because, you have Republican weeks and you have Democrat weeks and you kind of have boring weeks. And there's always strengths and weaknesses. I think I was like 0 for 20. And every time I was on, it was a difficult time. But Jim always made you feel welcome. He never surprised you. How did the show come about? How did you choose the original panelists?
Well, try to figure out how far in depth you want me to go with this. But the show was in existence. Excuse me. I took the show over in 1991. I think it had been in existence for 3 years previously. I started out as a radio show. Eventually they put it on TV, but basically it was a radio show with cameras in the room. When I took it over, I decided it needed to be a TV show. We needed to have video elements. We needed to do scripted stories.
You're a TV reporter. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, it was a real messy changeover. They fired the previous host. And there were a couple articles in the newspaper where members of the panel swore their allegiance to him and said they wouldn't come on the show. And so I had to do a lot of recruiting in a short period of time. And I think actually for a Democrat panelist, I asked Bill Morrow to do it first. And he was on Evan Bayh's staff at the time, and he actually took it to the governor and the staff, and they decided that Ann Delaney would be a better choice. And she's still doing the show. So
when I would be on and my mother would watch, she would say, "Shut up, Ann's talking." I'm like, "I was on the show." She goes, "I know, you need to let her talk more." And I'm like, "No. That's not the issue here. That's not the issue at all." Well, she's, I mean, for whether you like her or don't like her, better or worse or whatever, Republican or Democrat, I mean, she's a fierce advocate for the party. And that's why you're on the show. Like, some people go on the show, some people who've gone on and they've asked me about it. I'm like, look, you got to be all in for your party. That's why you're labeled Republican on the show.
Well, Rex Early had been on the show for a short period of time before I took over as the Republican, and I was still making calls to other people, and he called me up and said, "You going to have me on that show?" And I said, "You going to swear your loyalty to the last guy like these other folks have done?" And he said, "Listen, as Bill Jenner, former congressman, used to say, that loyalty is as deep as a cow pissing on a flat rock." I said, Rex, you're on.
Well, very few people are more quote worthy.
Yes, yeah. And then, we always had tried to have two members of the State House press corps on there. It was Susan Dillman and John Schwannis at the beginning. John's still there, so 27 years later.
Were there ever times where it got too heated?
Yeah.
I was on one time. I don't know if you're thinking of that, but
well, there have been times when panel members have left angry.
Angry at you, or just angry at the, it's easy for the R and the D to get. Because people who we're here with Jim Shella, longtime Channel 8.
Well, I tell you,
political reporter. But before the show, there's usually a little bit of congeniality, and they'll say, "Hey, man, sorry, you're it's a bad week to be the Republican, or a bad week to be the D, or that sort of thing," and you kind of laugh and joke, and then the show comes on, and then you do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes that doesn't always last throughout the show.
Yeah, I can tell you, you talked about Lindley Pearson's campaign. Rex Early was state GOP chairman at that point, and we were beating up on Pearson and his campaign pretty well on the show one week, and out in the parking lot, we were already talking about other things, and Rex just stopped, and he had a clipboard in his hand, and he took it over his head and slammed it on the parking lot and said, "You try to defend Lindley Pearson." So it's like, I don't know who or what people got angry with, but it's a passionate endeavor, and so I didn't want people not to be passionate, that's for sure. But in the end, everybody's friends.
You'd hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going on with one time I went on with John Zodi, and I remember telling somebody, "Yeah, Zodi is the D on the show this week," and the response I got was, "Be nice to John." I'm like, okay, I get it. John Zodi's one of the best guys ever. I get it.
Yeah.
A couple other questions, and then we'll finish with the last segment. You are John Zodi. The Democrats have lost 4 consecutive gubernatorial elections. They're basically wiped out, except for 2 highly urban congressional seats. What do you do? How do you fix it?
Well, I think they need leadership. They were in a similar circumstance before Evan Bayh showed up, and
but he's the hero. So, is there another hero out there? Is it Pete? Is it the mayor of
Pete Buttigieg?
South Bend?
I think Pete Buttigieg has leadership qualities. He has a bright future. I'm not sure he's going to focus on Indiana. He's already tried to run for Democratic National Chairman one time, and he's now going to Iowa. I think maybe his focus is outside the borders of Indiana, but they need somebody like that. And things tend to change. The 2020 elections could be potentially, it could be 1974 for the Democrats in Indiana. It could turn things around, and you don't know who might emerge.
Most of what you hear about Holcomb, though, is positive. Is even D's. Matter of fact, I know a prominent Democrat who I won't name just held a fundraiser for him at his house. He's like, "Look, we love what he's doing. He's great for the state. It's hard to and you've known Eric for, I'm sure, decades, and I've known him for a while.
He was on Indiana Week in Review a lot.
Yeah, and he's a terrific political mind. Probably the most traveled governor before he became governor in the state than anybody. It's going to be awfully tough to take him down. It seems like it's more like Are the Republicans going to fumble the ball at the goal line so that they can run it in for a yard, or the Democrats going to find that hero?
But if you're the Democrats, you're hoping that you can do this maybe in a couple of steps. You're probably not going to do it they're not going to turn everything around in 2020. That's for sure. But they need to make some gains. They need to pick things up so that they can get people involved.
Because 20, as I recall, there's no Senate.
That's right.
So it's all in for governor. If you win that, then you change the narrative. If you lose again, then it's more, oh, God, what are we going to do? And go up against Young in 2022.
Well, but they got to make sure that there are not super majorities in the General Assembly, and if they could pick up a congressional seat or two, and that's where you're more likely to develop leaders who can take you forward.
Or mayor's offices in the 19 elections.
Right, right.
One last thing I want to bring up. Because it's a personal experience. It's election night, November 2007. I'm working at Channel 8 on election night with Jim and Susan Williams from the Sports Corp at the time, I believe, and Toby McClamrock, who we all know and love. And that's the night that Greg Ballard beats Bart Peterson. What do you recall of that night other than you and I just looking at each other like, I can't freaking believe it?
I couldn't believe it. That's
the biggest upset in your time?
Yeah. I mean, I fully expected Hillary Clinton to win. It was a big surprise when she lost, and that's not an Indiana race. But the Ballard win over Peterson really took me off guard. I did not see that coming.
Even as unpopular, I mean, it got to be pretty rotten for. As I've said in the other actually, when we interviewed Greg Ballard, said, "Look, Bart Peterson was a pretty darn good mayor. I mean, he had a bad summer and fall, but the totality of his 8 years is far more positive than negative." And as I recall, Greg Ballard was like, "Yeah, he was. I get that, but." This happened.
Well, but in the meantime, nobody knew who Greg Ballard was. And the Marion County Republican Party gave him a desk and a phone and no money and no staff. I think he got one TV ad on the air, right?
I can't remember.
I mean, it's not even one that repeated. There was one ad that aired in 60 Minutes.
He got his money's worth.
He did. He did. Well, I mean, that was your classic. I called him the accidental mayor.
You did, and then Wagner picked it up on her blog. Jennifer Wagner did, right?
She created a blog called The Accidental Mayor. But the choices in that one were Peterson and not Peterson, and not Peterson won.
And, it was funny, too, because I remember that night, I just got finished running the elections for Marion County for the delightful Doris Ann Sadler. And it got later after the polls closed at 6, so it gets to be about 7 something. And you and Toby and Susan already done a couple of hits, and you were like, "Hey, we may put you on, we may not. That's fine." And I'm like, "No, I'm being on the computer and talking to people." And I don't know what time it was, 7:15, 7:30, and you came up and I was sitting at probably your desk, and you put your hands on my shoulders and goes, "What's it look like?" And I go, "It's over." And you go, "Well, Peterson's up a couple thousand votes. You think he's going to hang on?" And I go, "No." And you go, "Why not?" I go, "Because I live in Perry 6, which at the time was the largest precinct in the state, 6,000 voters." And I knew all this just from running the elections. And I go, "There are no Bart Peterson voters." I go, "Once Ballard's up, it's over." And there were like parts of Franklin and Decatur, but the old city wards had come in. You squeezed my shoulders, go, "You've got to be kidding me." And I remember Susan Williams was on my right and Toby was on my left. And I go, "Look, guys, here's what I'm telling you. The city wards are in. Peterson's only up 2,000. You probably have 30,000 voters yet to come in who would vote in a mayoral election. Vast majority are going to be Republicans." And I said, "When Ballard's up 1 vote, I'd call it on the air." And you go, "I don't want to do that." And I'm like, "Well, I get that, but he's going to win." And about a half hour later, Ballard was ahead and came back. And the look on people's faces when you said, "Well, we're going with it." And I think you were the first to call it.
I guess I don't recall that.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. Because I'm like, this dude's going to win. And then I had to go on the air because Toby left. to go do to go to the victory thing. And it was one of the most surreal nights of my life. And you and I just looked at each other like Thelma and Louise getting ready to go off like, I can't believe it. Then the next day, I go to Marion County headquarters. You're interviewing Greg Ballard at the little desk they gave him.
Right. I mean, and I couldn't believe that I was the only reporter there. I mean, I came to work the next morning and said, Greg Ballard's the story. What else is there? Let's go find him.
I couldn't believe they let you in. So I walk in.
He had no staff. There was nobody to stop me.
Well, so we'll end this part of the podcast by me thanking you, because in an inadvertent way, you changed my entire life, because I walk in and go, how'd Shella get in here? And they go, he just walked in with his camera and said he wanted to interview Greg Ballard. I went, well, why are you letting him? And they go, well, he just walked in. And I went and said hi to you and said hi to Jim and said hi to Colonel Ballard, mayor-elect.
But it's one of the first rules of reporting. It's always better to beg forgiveness than to ask permission.
And I walked out going, these guys are so completely unprepared for this victory. I mean, much like Trump, right? I mean, they weren't even planning their inauguration stuff. I mean, that's come out in several stories.
Yep.
And that night I got a call from somebody who said, hey, you want to be press secretary for Ballard? I'm like, well, you need to hire somebody, because Shella can't just walk in with a camera and start talking to him. And they go, we want you to do it. And then I remember my first call was to you. You wouldn't remember this, but I do. I'm like, all interviews for Ballard go through me. And you go, why? And I go, because I just got hired. Thank you. And I probably never would have happened if you hadn't been there that morning with the camera. So I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And no one could have predicted, and I'd say this to my dying day and comment on this and then we'll close, but he became a phenomenal mayor. And at the beginning, there were people who were just frightened that he was going to undo everything and, turn the clock back, however you want to say it.
Right.
And he turned out to be the exact opposite.
Well, the day after Election Day in 2007, nobody would have predicted that he'd get reelected, and he got reelected, and probably could have been elected a third time if he chose.
Post RFRA, he was polling in the 70s. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, he was enormously popular in the city for his public stand on that. Yeah. We're here with Jim Shella and Leaders and Legends. We close, as we do with all our guests, with 5 questions. It's the same 5 questions. And so if you're ready, I'm ready.
I'm ready.
What was your first car you purchased?
My first car was a Ford Fairlane.
Isn't that a movie?
It was
Andrew Dice Clay.
It was my grandfather's car that he blacked out and drove it through the back of his garage, and all I had to do was pay for the repairs, and it became mine.
Give it to Jimmy. What was your first concert?
I went to a concert in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, when I was in junior high. And it was a triple bill. It was Three Dog Night, Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, and the Beach Boys.
Early 70s?
Yeah.
With the Beach Boys are last, you could tell how much they've fallen.
Might have been the 60s. I think it was still the 60s, 67, 68.
Mayor Ballard, doesn't he have his first concert was in Bloomington when he was at IU, Sly and the Family Stone. Now, I wouldn't have ever suggested.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I never would have predicted that. If you could recommend one book to anyone to read, what would you recommend?
Oh, my goodness. Other than the Bible?
I thought about just excluding the Bible from answers because it's going to be popular, but if that's the answer, it's hard for me to fight that.
If you're going to pick one, that's probably the one.
Any particular book or?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not a huge reader. The one book that I've read multiple times would be All the President's Men.
That's terrific.
And I've seen the movie more times than that, and it never gets old because one of the things about the story of All the President's Men, Woodward and Bernstein, is that there's a lot of just old-fashioned hard work journalism going on, making lists of names and calling them and crossing them off and knocking on doors, and it's a lot of shoe leather.
And they've it's weird to be in that garage.
Yeah.
Or see the door at the museum. If they'd only learned, if they'd only taped the door the right way, they wouldn't have had all these problems. If you could witness any event in history, which would you choose? You could be anywhere with anyone at any point in time.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I mean, the interesting thing is, I've been to a lot of events. I've been to inaugurations and been to a State of the Union. I've been to Supreme Court arguments. I've seen a lot of things, and I'm always there as kind of an outsider.
Like working.
Yeah. And you have to watch in detached fashion, and I guess I'm still adjusting to that now that I'm not working. I'm not really big into witnessing things except to relay it to other people.
Okay, so let's change the question just because of what you said. If you could have covered any event as a journalist,
that I didn't cover.
Even if it's, the Peter Zenger trial, in the 18th century, just any event, anything that you could cover as a journalist. Kennedy assassination, moon landing.
Yeah. Probably. I think the Kennedy assassination is a good choice. I mean, when you're a journalist, what you want to do. And actually, see, I never thought about big events. Because when I talk about being a political reporter, but I always thought it was my job to go to the big event and then find out something that you couldn't learn from the stage. Talk to people involved. I always said that my job is kind of like, pulling back the curtain so people can see the wizard. And so it's not really about the event per se. It's about knowing how things come about and what the event means and being able to put it in perspective. So with the Kennedy assassination, everybody learned everything they need to know. I think. I guess I'm not good with philosophical questions.
It's all right. Last question is, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world right now, who would you choose? A couple hours off the record. Talk about anything you want.
More philosophical questions.
I'm trying to be the wizard here and give you the...
Yeah.
Like someone in your profession or a politician that you never covered and would like to, or someone you covered and just had a ball covering him and it'd be fun to just hang out.
Yeah.
Or, your daughter.
Well, Kate would be a good choice. That's a good choice. Although I've done that this week. So
Ballard chose Mrs. Ballard, which was an incredibly predictable answer.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird, but I don't give a lot of thought to that sort of thing.
Peyton Manning? Someone in sports? Someone different? Someone?
I don't know. One of the you can accuse me of being cynical, but I'm not really taken by famous people at this point. I'm not. It doesn't do a lot for me. I guess I like to laugh. It'd be nice to spend the evening with a comedian somebody who's just funny, Robin Williams, if he was still alive, I suppose would be.
That's not a bad answer. Not a bad answer at all. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Leaders and Legends. We're with Jim Shella. Jim, thank you so much. It's fun to ask you questions for a change.
Thank you.
And we hope maybe in the future you can come back on. If you need anything, your friendship is very important to me. Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert at veteranstrategies.com.